Hello, our story today is called She Still Had to Go Home, and it's based on John 8, 2 to 11. The adulteress, who had been forgiven by Jesus in John 8, begins to head home when she realizes what she still has to face, all the consequences of her sin. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more, verse 11. These words were almost unbelievable. A half hour ago, she had been dragged out of her illicit lover's house, shoved into the streets. Just minutes before, she had been bracing for the crushing stone of judgment. Now these stones lay on the ground, the execution squad is gone, and the young rabbi with compassionate eyes is telling her she was free to go. Free? Where had her guilt gone? It was hard to comprehend. One moment she was a condemned sinner, and the next she was condemnation-free. As she turned and began to walk toward home, she felt something strange. She was clean, cleaner than she could remember. How could that be? She hadn't done anything to deserve to be clean. There hadn't even been a ritual sacrifice or water cleansing according to the law yet. That rabbi had simply declared her guilt-free, and it was so. No one had ever spoken like this man. She heard God when he spoke. But after a few minutes of walking, it hit her. I have to go home, and fear shot through her. She wanted to bolt. The rabbi had forgiven her, but waiting at home was her betrayed husband and her children, her parents, his parents, and her neighbors, her illicit lover's family. She had brought shame and inexpressible pain upon them all. Her life was like a shattered pot, shards all over the ground, shattered by her sin. She almost longed to be buried by the stones. But she still felt clean. She drew her head covering around her face and took a detour, walking streets where she might not be recognized. She needed time to think and pray. That was strange, too. She hadn't prayed a heartfelt prayer in years. She hadn't wanted anything to do with God. She had merely been going through the religious motions while secretly pursuing her own happiness in forbidden places. She had just tried to lay low and escape the judge's attention. But now it was different. As she thought of God, that fresh cleanness washed over her again, like it had when the rabbi spoke. She found herself wanting to run to God to hide rather than from him. Surprisingly, he was the one person she wanted to talk to most, and this was new. God was no longer her condemning judge. He had become her forgiving father. So she ducked into a lonely alley to repent of her horrible selfish sin and to ask her father to help with what seemed like an impossible situation. As she prayed, she heard the rabbi's words again. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. And then these words that followed, I am with you always, Matthew 28:20. With men it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God, Mark 10:27. With a new peace that surpassed her understanding, she caught her breath and headed for what was left of her home. We do not know what the woman faced after she left Jesus, but it must have been very painful. Jesus removed the guilt of her sin, taking it and God's wrath against it upon himself. But he did not remove the fact that she had sinned and the relational pain that must have resulted. Maybe her husband was also saved and they were reconciled. Maybe he divorced her. But whatever happened, she remained forgiven and clean. She was justified in God's sight. In Jesus, she became a new creature. Wearing Jesus' righteousness, the Father viewed her as if she had never sinned and if she had perfectly obeyed, because Jesus became sin for her and he perfectly obeyed the Father on her behalf. And even the earthly consequences of her sin became a means of grace to her because God called all of them to work together for her good. And that's the hope we all need. We need the hope that we have been justified by the substitutionary atonement of Jesus, and we need the hope of the promise of Romans 8:28, that God will work all things, even the fallout from our past sins, together for good for us. God's grace was sufficient for this woman, both to cover her sins and to redeem her life. And likewise, His grace will be sufficient for you. Thank you for listening today, and enjoy the rain.